There's also the issue of what you might call fake system, where people have basically just given up. They've given up that they can ever get the medium to actually happen with everybody. They don't believe there's such a thing as music anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They say, well, if we're going to do this, I might as well just be in control. I'll make it be good. And you guys get to dress up. And I submit that there is a whole school and family and set of subfamilies of role-playing texts which say this directly. I mean, they say exactly what I just said. There is no medium that we can do working together. Humans are incapable. It was a lovely dream some decades ago. It doesn't work. So in order to do this thing or claim that we're role players or do this role-playing thing or get my role-playing game published, people buy it, we will simply cede control of everything to this one person who will take care of it all through the course of play. And everybody else gets to dress up and basically be compliant. And that's not a system. It's not a system. It's not game design. I'm not talking about game design that I happen not to like. I flatly say it's not the thing. And if it says it's the thing, it's a lie. So that is one of the reasons why I would much rather play a simplistic game with very minimal or at least not particularly profound content in which we can enjoy the medium, see what happens, and enjoy what we came here on purpose to do, whatever it is. I'd much rather do that than sit down at a table with somebody with their grand campaign carefully in control of everything about how it's going to turn out, and it will be so awesome.
Yeah, I can definitely see this. I've recently been on a weekend workshop from improvisational theater, because I'm a part of this like improv training, and it was a very interesting experience, especially when we came to trying to make the story on the scene while playing it. And I just thought to myself, this is like playing a session where this is exactly as playing a role play session where everyone is trying to somehow create the story together. This is like very much alike. So improv theater aside, this showed me that, for example, why I really like that there is a game master in a system, because when everyone is trying to tell the story, even if we are trying to work together, we are not very skilled at it.
Well, there's an interesting point. When you say tell the story, I think we're already off the rails. Or rather, that's not the right terminology. When you say tell the story, we're already falling apart.
Create the story while playing it.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
But and that means that you don't have one, right? You can't have one and create one. So therefore, if you can have lots of backstory. That's okay, right? Preparation, setup, backstory, maps. Nothing wrong with those. But that's raw material, isn't it, for the events? So what we see in a game where you don't have a clear idea of what the constraints are, and this is often the case for games which say that they have no game master, is that it's also unclear what on earth a person whose turn it is to go to the next scene actually has to work with. What do they have to work with? If they don't have anything to work with, no constraint coming in, the only thing they can do is think about where it's going to go, which means they have to be controlling play. And that's bad, right? It's not going to work. What you have now is the need no matter how many people are going to be performing that particular game master type task, it needs to be a clear task. It needs to be a known task. It needs to be an enjoyable task, right? There needs to be something actually to work with. There is a game called Wuthering Heights, in which the only rules are basically the crazy ways that your characters keep reacting to their own reactions and the things around them. So everybody's kind of hysterical. It's this hysterical Victorian comedy game, basically.
Okay.
So it's quite funny, actually. But the important point is that since everybody has these extreme reactions that they've just done or could do, it's extremely easy to know what happens next. It's extremely easy for whoever has the job of saying, okay, now we're looking at this character and this is where they are. It's extremely easy for them to say because of all the dynamic things that are happening. And the fact that in Wuthering Heights as a system, it's impossible to control outcomes. You have no idea what's going to happen in any scene. It's because it's so psycho. So therefore, it's a very good game to say, that's funny. This game has almost no this game has no literary merit at all. If anything, it's a horrifying parody of a particular branch of literature. But it has no lovely, we are making a great story. We have no pride. You play Wuthering Heights, you can have no pride. Okay, it's fun for that. So but you are quickly learn, you can look back on having played and say, that's funny. It was so easy to say where we are next or where this character is next and what is happening. It's just easy because of all the cool shit that's spiraling out of control. You have so much material to use for that decision, you don't even see it as a decision. It just seems obvious where you are next. So this is what I see missing in a lot of the games today, which are very much, okay, we're going around the turn, you set the scene, now you set the scene, right? I see lack of constraint based on what has come before, whether it's fictional or whether it's mechanical. There's not enough consequence in the activity of play so that the fiction now has a new shape. And I will pick on Blades in the Dark.
Okay.
Which is to say that in my experience, and I have been talking to people with more experience about it, and their views on it, vary. So let's not treat this as my pronouncement from the mountaintop. I've been having dialogue about this, and this is what I'm thinking, is that during the caper, when the group is out there doing their operation, it doesn't really matter what each player says any character does. The actual things they do during the caper in and of themselves don't really have much impact. You roll, you're going to have just as many dice rolls no matter what you say. You're going to have the statistical chance to gain some stress no matter what you say. And you're going to end up with some, reward or capacity for paying your debts or not at the end of the caper. And that is determined in a fashion that has nothing to do with what you actually did. So it seems to me as though after playing a few rounds of capers and Blades in the Dark, I was almost tempted to say, look, can we just stop fucking around during the capers and just make these dice rolls with no narration or fiction whatsoever, just to do it? Because it's not making any difference what we do. The dynamics of the game are all larger scale about how much you owe and how much stress is there and whether you funnel money into paying off your debts, or whether you funnel your money into other means and try to dodge your debts, and then that comes back around to your circumstances for the next caper. That's where all the dynamics are in the superstructure. But what you say during play of the caper is really kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like painting in the air with your finger, right? You don't actually make any picture. It doesn't really do much. And
I'm trying to really understand your point, and I'm not sure if I'm getting it, because maybe we are at the same point or not. So I'm not sure if I get it. So to say, because you said that whatever we are saying doesn't matter, I'm going to counter this to better understand your point of view. It does matter what I say, because I can beat the guard hoping that he will not guard the door that they can go through them, or I can convince the guard that it is not the best place for him to be here right now, for him to just like walk away, and I'll be able to get through the door. It does matter what I say, because it creates because it resolves the situation in a different matter. It will turn out there will be some die roll, and what I said
it
before
will be
will
the
influence
same die
this.
roll. Go on, yes.
So what I say will influence what we will roll, how many dice, and so on and so on and so on, and influences the chance of success or of consequences.
What I'm
So I'm
okay.
trying to so I'm trying to understand. Do you mean that what I say doesn't mean because the result is the same, we will get through the door? I'm just trying to understand
No, I
what
think
your
it's a
point
little more
is.
profound than that. I think it will have no impact on the larger structure of play. It doesn't create any constraints on what can be said, on what can come of it for any new instance of saying what happens next. It's all just this big black box. The caper events are just a big black box that don't have any direct impact on what happens next, except for the numerical aspects. And so it is in many ways, you can make a lot of noise and describe how you get through the door in very colorful fashion and wave your hands around and act and talk in your character's voice even. You can be hilarious when you convince the guard to go and get you, some water because you're so thirsty or something. Or you can be brutal and beat the guard over the head. Fine. So what? What does that mean in terms of afterwards? What constraint is on the person setting up the next situation of play? And the answer is nothing. You don't have any kind of sense of overall fictional change to anything. And this, to me, is one of the big flaws of a lot of the designated story games. It's a lot of flapping your mouth and emitting loud noises and descriptions with no sense of consequence for what occurs next, with no sense of constraint for someone else in the exercise of their authority to have something happen next. And instead, you have this aesthetic of, well, I'll just be trying to make a good story, so I'll make up something that will be a good story. Oh, I'll make an interesting conflict now, right? I'll make up a conflict. This is nonsense. This is where the ball of play, right? Your rules have they hit the ground, the air goes out of the ball, it flattens and it lies there. And the next person to talk has to go and pick up that ball, fill it full of air, and throw it up in the air again for everybody. It doesn't matter what you said. there are numerical things that are rolled into the next sequence of play, but you could have been doing anything to make those rolls. You could have been doing anything. And though you would be making those rolls, and the consequences of stress or not, or checking things off, is all the same.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So to better understand, I think I'm slowly getting at what you're meaning. Can we now talk about some example that does it better, so that I have the, in your opinion, worst example, and in your opinion, something that does it better, so that I can see the contrast between them?
So, are you going to describe the worst and the better, or am I?
No, I'm really curious because we now talked about
Well,
how getting
I will go and
the
I will take my 1977 version of Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
By J. Eric Holmes.
Okay.
A version which is not widely played. There is an OSR game called Blueholme, which takes those rules and refurbishes them into a modern publication. But that's probably what most people play if they play that version of D&D. But I like the original. But in that, I will say this. Whatever you may say about its limitations, and it is very limited, very focused play in terms of content. Whatever you may say about that, in that game, if you choose to go left instead of going right, you will have a different experience of play. The game master is constrained greatly in terms of what happens next. And they did not control your decision of going left or going right. And so therefore, in a Holmes D&D game, and going by the very limited examples of play they have in there, because it was not a long-lived product and was swiftly overtaken by other products with a much greater support system. There are some limited adventures you can play, and it only goes up with levels through 1 through 3. The game doesn't have any levels higher than 3. So therefore, you have a very limited scope of play. But if you look at the examples that are available for it, you will find that they are frighteningly consequential and unique in terms of the play experience, depending on where you go and what you say and do. So it is I'm picking a dungeon crawl example for a bit of shock value here, right? Because this is not, story ambitious play even in the slightest. But it is, on the other hand, very, very fun in terms of some of those challenging or confrontational aspects that I was talking about. And one of the reasons for why it's fun is because you can trace what happens in play directly to specific decisions and combinations of outcomes. The game experience would have been different if people had their characters behave differently. And to me, that's a plus. To me, that is when we look back on play, and I described this a few minutes ago, this was fun, partly because I know that we did it. That particular decision in tactical terms may have been the stupidest thing ever. But hey, that's what we did, and this is how it turned out. Boy, we were lucky to live through that, or yeah, you can bet after we did that, our asses were dead, right? Whatever. But
cool. Yeah, I think I'm getting it. So maybe I'm getting it. So you are saying that it is important to have some real decisions in game.
Well, but what I mean by real decisions is that their consequences are treated as constraints by whoever has authority over what happens next. Whoever has authority over what happens next has to take what happened as a primary constraint. This is achieved in a game like the Holmes game. This is achieved in a very simplistic way. You have a maze, which puts the constraint both on the game master and on the players.
Yeah,
but that's very simplistic. But there are less simplistic ones that have a lot more to do with our intuitive understanding or beliefs about how people behave. So
I still think that I failed to see your example. I failed to understand your example because, from my opinion, in Blades in the Dark, next person who takes action. Yes, sometimes it will happen that the problem will resolve completely. Let's just say we beat the guard, and the guard is now beaten dead. There is no more guard. But it's definitely possible for the next person to jump in line. So we have a dead body and a pool of blood. I should probably hide it. He takes my constraints, and he goes to hide the body so that the bystanders will not see that there's a dead guard and to go get help. So it's kind of the same that you described with a dungeon?
Not really. Issues like you're describing are fine as far as the theatricality of the moment is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
But they are not particularly, they are not having, how am I going to put it? You could have the next person do something like, well, I'm going to ignore this whole situation and go climb up to the next window outside and go in that way. So what I'm trying to get at is that we are talking about the next authoritative statement that is made that is context for anyone else. You are not just saying what my guy does next. You, whoever it is, who has something to say about the overall situation and what its context is now. And in Blades of the Dark, that occurs primarily at that superstructural level. That the events of the caper are basically wiggle room. Anybody can say anything, anything can happen. And then it's only the big box of the caper and the numbers that come out of it that go into the superstructure. And so it seems very busy. Everybody says what their character does and they jump around, but I really felt very empty while playing. I mean, it was kind of like I got to bang on my little toy drum for a while.
It's interesting because it's interesting what you are describing because maybe I really felt it. I don't know. Because, for example, when I was GM, because the Fortune in the Dark has GM, not the MC.
Right.
Maybe it was the part of the group because my player decided to be the smugglers. I was very often feeling that I have to constantly invent new obstacles.
Well, you see, that's what I'm talking about.
The obstacles got resolved, and I had to come up with the next one.
That is supporting my point.
The next, yes,
exactly.
Yes,
because you had to start from scratch at each step.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's what I am saying. Flat ball. The ball stops and has no properties. So my example with the Holmes D&D may seem very trivial because when all is said and done, you are talking about, some fairly incompetent would-be thieves and warriors, right? And very badly trained magic users, I might add, venturing into a dangerous place. And then the big mystery is whether any of them are going to get out alive or not. Well, it's not very compelling, right, as fiction. It is, however, when you think of it as confrontational, can I do it? Then it becomes more fun. And because what happens does have these consequences that are constraints for the game master as well as for me. Let's take an example that may be much easier and I think will be very close to home. Let's take your Apocalypse World game.
But let's stay for a moment with your dungeon example. Yeah, although I'm trying to figure out that the examples you gave are really fitting different purposes of play.
Oh, of course they do. Of course they do.
Because, for
No
example,
question there.
the second example you gave isn't really interesting to me. And even though I know playing Blades in Dark can sometimes fall flat, I really enjoy this this job description, and and how everything happens. It's enjoyable for me because I like the first purpose of play that you described, the creating of having as much as interesting story as possible.
Yeah, the terminology for that I think may be still tripping us up. But the primary issue that I have is that
Mm-hmm.
if we are talking about play in which there are constraints upon the next situation,
Mm-hmm.
so that you don't have to stop and make it up from nothing,
Yep.
that therefore you don't have a forced quality, an arbitrary forced quality of the fictional events. And
Mm-hmm.
also, nobody is ever in a position of control.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in Blades in the Dark, there is, in my opinion, it's almost a little bit more like improvisational comedy as a performance. You set the stage, the players then go into kind of their improv, you know, a performative behavior, which is funny,
Mm-hmm.
fun, or whatever, and then it's over relatively quickly, I might add. And then what happens next and why is handed to one person to carry forward. So it
Mm-hmm.
is, to me, again, okay, first and foremost, I really don't think it's serving the purposes of an interesting story particularly at all,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. It is colorful, it's performatively fun in a way that improv is fun, but you're not really getting anything to do with, uh, you're not really getting anything to do with the the consequential punch of what happened and how you feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that this is all leading us. The reason I'm sticking with this so strongly in our discussion is because it's leading us to the issue of Fiasco,
Mm-hmm.
where, in terms of performative entertainment, Fiasco is exactly what it sells itself as, which
Mm-hmm.
is you will entertain and delight your friends with the way you jump into this ridiculous situation. And they will do the same for you. They will all be funny,
Mm-hmm.
basically, or gross, or whatever it is called for, in that particular version.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, exactly how things go is fixed. I mean, how things are going to go in the larger sense, how, you know, how the how am I going to put it? Because this person has his character try to kill your character with a frying pan,
Mm-hmm.
or in this other game, this person has their character try to kiss your character inappropriately.
Mm-hmm.
There is no difference between the two in the context of the way a Fiasco game is structured and continues. There's no real difference between the two activities. Everybody's going to be doing various behaviors. When the tilt comes, then the play goes into a different mode, and it's kind of like it provides an absolutely fixed platform for the performance of improvisational theater. It
Mm-hmm.
does that.